Press record.
Excellent. Thank you, Stuart. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to I think, first VOX-Pol's workshop in this academic year, OSINT Practice and Ethics. My name is Dr. Anna Kruglova. I'm a lecturer in terrorism studies at the University of Salford. And today's workshop is, I think, a recognition of the increased interest and, I should say, probably demand for open source intelligence, not only in the intelligence field, but also in the field of terrorism studies, especially academia and practical aspect of research. So hopefully this session is going to be of interest for everyone who is attending today, and you all live with a lot of practical information that you would be able to implement in your research and further practical work. So I'm very excited to have Tristan Johns with us, who is co-founder of Spyrian Limited, a UK private intelligence and investigations firm. Tristan has an extensive experience in corporate investigations, maritime intelligence, counter-threat assessment, media security, and other fields as well, including extremist content monitoring. So he is he's kindly agreed to deliver this workshop, share some knowledge regarding the basics of OSINT, but also important questions that we need to bear in mind while we are working with open source intelligence, such as our own safety and data integrity. I think without further ado, Tristan, thank you very much for coming and doing this presentation, and it's over to you.
Thank you very much, Anna. Yes, I'm Tristan. And I suppose with that, we shall begin. So firstly, what is intelligence? And then more specifically, what is intelligence in the context we're speaking about? So the MOD says, the UK MOD says, it's the systematic and coordinated acquisition, analysis of information to assess capabilities, intent, and opportunities for exploitation at all levels. I prefer to use a more simplified definition, which essentially replicates that, but in more layman's terms, that intelligence is actionable information. That is to say, information wrapped in context that can be used to do an action. So in our case, it's usually answer a question or make a decision based on that intelligence. And that would be the difference between just information and intelligence. Information you might not be able to make a decision based on. And when conducting intelligence, we generally use the intelligence cycle. And I mean this in a practical sense. So if I was to do a report, or in maybe an academic sense, if you had a research project, we would always wrap our entire intelligence process within this framework, which is we have a direction, and the direction is usually an intelligence question. It may be one that we pose ourselves, or that is given to us by a third party. And then with that direction, we move on to work out what we want to collect, and how we want to approach the collection. And then we collect information. We then process the information. So this could be collating it, working out what is missing, any gaps in information, working out if we can plug those gaps or not, and sorting the information for analysis. And so this would be the assessment that we put on the processed information. We then sort of analyze, put into whatever product is most appropriate. So this could be anything from a verbal report to a full written report with graphs, maps, whatever. And then we disseminate it back to the whoever is given the direction or is the audience intelligence. And they feed back if it was relevant. And then from that, we can get new direction. As it is a cycle, it is iterative process. So each stage can create a sub-cycle. So during collection or processing, for instance, it's quite common to realize that the original question that you're looking at actually might not answer, or you might not be able to find an adequate answer without addressing a new question. So it could be a bit of a block to your original one. And so you start the cycle again from yourself, where again, you give yourself direction, and you're also the audience for the disseminated thing. So the intelligence cycle is important to keep in mind. And the reason I put it out there rather than just some arbitrary concept is something that's embedded with the entire process. And then when I'll be talking today, I'll be referring back to parts of the cycle, and direction particularly. I suppose direction and dissemination particularly are the two key ones, because you always have to keep in mind what you're doing and why you're doing it and the audience you're doing it for, which really informs the other parts of collection process. But I wanted to get those definitions and concepts out of the way with, because they are very important with on the whole concept of open source and other intelligence. So what is open source intelligence, or OSINT or OSINT? Most commonly OSINT. I was always fond of OSINT. So it is just any source that is open, as in publicly available. It doesn't have some secret or closed aspect to it, which makes it restricted to most people. So most information that is gathered by intelligence organizations or even private organizations is open source these days. We could thank the internet for that, but even before internet, open source was a key tool in intelligence. I think UK started in the state terms using open source in a widespread way with the BBC. They had a overseas radio monitoring service, which would look at foreign radios, and I think this in the 30s or 40s, and identify potential sort of news stories of interest, of national interest to the British government. That service still exists today within the BBC. It's a service called BBC Monitoring. It's a bit more in depth now, but it's been around for a while. In terms of the widespread adoption of OSINT, particularly in the intelligence services, public sector, that happened probably in the 90s, where it was realized that the majority of information was open source, but the funding allocations were very, very little compared to traditional human source and other things like signal, satellites, intelligence. But for us, in the private sector, we care about a few, these are just some examples of sources. So in general, public records, usually from government websites or private websites, or even just going to an office and requesting something. These might be somewhat restricted depending on the country. For instance, in the EU, a lot of states, you have to be an EU citizen. But if you are an EU citizen, you can freely gain access to records. But if you're not, you can't. Similarly in the US, for instance, there's many sources that you need to be a US citizen, which you get a lot of data. But it is still open source, as in if you are the person who can do it, then you can do that openly. So of course, news that isn't paywalled, but even paywalled might be. Libraries, an amazing source, and archives, just being able to go somewhere and get information for free or very low cost. And then of course, images and videos and other websites and databases that you find. So it's pretty self-explanatory. If you can access it openly, then it's probably open source, as opposed to having to fly to the deepest Congo to meet somebody in the jungle to ask them a question. which might be a bit more restricted and not sort of public to everyone. However, saying that, the definition of open source, so what I said before previously was a more purist definition, but open source can also include certain closed sources, or at least sources that may have restricted or limited access, such as the deep web, which is, I guess to a simplified way, the internet that hasn't been indexed by search engines. So things like Google. This could include things like paywalled websites, documents just held on websites that are unindexed, like PDF dumps and things like that. A lot of things like email, but that might be not open source unless it's freely available. And also something like the dark web, which is parts of the internet that require other tools to access. So we specifically refer to Tor, which is the Onion network, a specialized browser made by the US. Well, the software was developed by the US Navy to allow anonymous, basically browsing through kind of using multiple proxies, computers. But there's often a lot of association with nefarious activities on the dark web due to the way you can be anonymous. But that is something you can also, anyone can download and access, but there's an extra level to get to that point. Social media is a sort of subsection. It's not necessarily overlapping, because social media is often quite restricted in access. You generally need an account to even view content these days. And so it's not always open. It's usually free. It's usually easy to make an account, so the bar is quite low. But there are other privacy restrictions around it. So, and the way you search social media can be slightly distinct, but it can be included within OSINT. HUMINT as well can be OSINT. And I guess the point I'm making here is that these things overlap and they're not exclusive. So in terms of HUMINT, that could be you communicating with someone on social media or a forum, or identifying somebody and making that contact openly on the internet. It could be Discord, it could be internet relay channels or forums or social media or streaming websites or something like that, where you have a human connection and you can gain information from the human directly. GEOINT, so the US Department of Homeland Security, I think has recently, or maybe not recently, but they put out documents saying basically they consider GEOINT mostly to be open source these days because of the availability of satellite imagery and other sort of geographical related information that's just freely available on the internet, or at least can be purchased if not freely available. Think of Google Maps, Maxar images, Mapbox. There's a lot of available sources that are just free to use, and to an extent as well, some signals intelligence or SIGINT. There's a lot of websites that monitor radio signals, for instance. You can go in and tweak the frequencies and just listen to open radio waves, long range, short range. And there's a lot of other ones, like ones that measure sort of GPS interference and other, like weather data, arguably. And all of these are quite accessible and often open source in their code frameworks, which means they're being released openly. And you don't need any accounts. So all of this can also be OSINT, which means for us it makes it a bit difficult because there's so much OSINT. And we've got to keep in mind information overload when approaching it. I will say, as I don't think we said before, that Please do keep questions in mind. There will be a question and answer section throughout. I'm not sure how that's been dealt with exactly, but write questions down if you think you forget, and we'll try and address as much as we can. And before we dive into how to do OSINT, we have to keep a lot of other things in mind, particularly the ethical considerations. So when conducting investigations or whatever you're doing, this often involves a lot of information about people, personal information, personal data. And so depending where you are based and where the individuals you might be looking into are based, this, of course, can bring up some legal and privacy issues. So, for instance, in the UK and EU, you've got to keep in mind the General Data Protection Regulation, GDPR, of whether what you're doing may breach GDPR. So you've got to make sure that your investigation is relevant, that the information you're finding based on, say, individuals is actually relevant to the investigation, and that the information that you're holding on somebody is secure as well. So if you are doing an investigation and you do have quite an amount of personal data, you've got to make sure that data is protected because you become a data holder. And so there are certain responsibilities you have. It becomes a bit more of a gray area. For instance, if you're in the UK and you're investigating someone in the US or say, Kazakhstan or South Africa, they have different legislation, which doesn't always fall under GDPR. But I think as a general rule, you should follow the concepts of it to make sure that what you're doing is, like I say, relevant and also respecting the privacy and security of other individuals as well. And there may be safeguarding issues as well. And this is more specific to OSINT rather than just general research, that you come across things during your research that may present a safeguarding issue. As an example, there's a website called shodan.io, which is a search engine of the Internet of Things. So the Internet of Things being essentially everything that is connected to the internet. That doesn't just include websites. So this could be like a smart fridge, security cameras, access controls, just internet connected devices that aren't necessarily computers. And on this website, Shodan, you can search for, say, webcams. And there are a lot of private webcams that individuals have in their houses that they don't realize are being streamed directly to the internet just because the way they've set it up. So you could find yourself in a situation, for instance, where you see a webcam of an individual residence that might be in a child's room. And so you have to keep something like that in mind, that just because things are open source, it doesn't mean they are intended to be openly accessible. There may be private things that people have put out that they don't want to be open, which of course for investigators is sometimes the point in terms of exposing things like corruption or extremism. But on the other side, it could really impact people that are, quite innocent and just unaware of what they're giving out. There's not always a good answer to this. For instance, in the Shodan example, there might be no way to contact those individuals or even know where they are or who they are. But it's something to keep in mind when you're conducting this research of what you find. And again, it comes back to how relevant is this information to your direction? And should you be looking at this? And if you can you let somebody know if you need to? And that's why I say keep on task. You always go back to direction and your audience of who you're going to present to, then you should be able to find, well, not find, sorry, you should be usually able to keep yourself on track and determine whether what you're looking at is relevant or not. And even that simple thing can probably help you in terms of cutting through some of this difficulty. But you also have to consider yourself during these investigations, particularly when looking into an extremism. There can be a lot of unpleasant things you come across. So I particularly look into, or have looked into, and sometimes currently do, far-right extremism in the UK and Ukraine, other parts of Europe, but mainly Ukraine, as well as the Sahel, so usually around Mali and that area. And previously I've done projects in around the Sulu Sea as well with kidnap for ransom groups. But also diving into sort of more international Islamist terrorist organizations as well. And of course, when you're doing these investigations, you might see content from these groups, and it can be quite unpleasant. So, deaths, beheadings, torture, videos of these things for propaganda purposes or other purposes. But not even that extreme level of things. Just the coming across I suppose the hate itself can be quite disturbing at times. We have, you see relatively, I suppose, normal people, and then the way they're reacting to content with such hate can be quite disturbing in itself. And the rhetoric used when it's quite constant, targeting certain groups or kind of glorifying sort of violence or potential violence, things like that. So you've got to keep these things in mind when you are conducting your research as well, that you might find things that make you uncomfortable. And so it's not just an ethical responsibility to who you're looking into or what you're looking into and how to do that, but also to yourself, I think is quite important. And again, keep yourself on task. Just because something might be interesting, potentially, it doesn't mean you should go and look at it if it's not relevant to the research. As an example, there's a IS forum that I joined to view, and has very many channels from different parts of the world, including something called I think it's called the Cookhouse or something channel, which is just bomb making recipes. And there are other channels where people will post videos of torture or beheadings. So there'll be people, in English, French, and Arabic, writing about how, basically it's like if you were to go on YouTube and see people reacting to a video and saying, "Oh, that's great," that kind of thing. But to this kind of extreme content, it's not always that nice. So, as I'll say once again, keep on task, follow the direction, and also the outcomes that you have in mind when doing any research. So, how do we actually do OSINT? Now, for a lot of you, this should be pretty basic stuff. Some of it hopefully is a bit more basic, a little bit more basic, and you'll at least learn something new. So before we start properly, what tools should we use? So it's always an important consideration of even something simple like an internet browser. I personally use all the browsers listed here. I don't use them for every investigation. I don't use them for all research, but each of them has a place. In terms of your primary browser you use, it should be basically down to personal preference, kind of based on browser extensions that might help you. I won't go into that so much, but I'd be happy to in terms of questions. and just whatever you feel may be best to use. Now, the reason you might want to use multiple browsers, which is quite important to have that ability, is that certain websites are designed to use on certain browsers. And more importantly, they may not work on others. So I prefer using Firefox, for instance, but most websites these days are designed to use on Edge or Chrome, or even older government websites in a lot of countries, Internet Explorer. Even recently, I went on a university website, not Swansea, and the login for the students' access wouldn't work on Firefox. You have to use Chrome or Edge. And it doesn't tell you it won't work in Firefox. It just gives you unspecified errors until all you do is switch browser, same website works. So it's important to have a few different browsers. You don't necessarily need all of these, but I think Firefox is probably the least needed. But definitely Chrome and Edge at least when doing research. There are a lot of useful extensions, such as things to get past paywalls of certain websites, or sort of image reverse little quick tools and other things like that, and things to stop being tracked as well. I won't get into that too much. So non-browsers, some way to store the information that you have collected. So maybe some note-taking software or even a browser extension to help save links and notes. Databases, maybe, this could be, and I know a lot of people wouldn't like this, but a database is sort of any collection of data, really. So, you could use Notepad theoretically. It doesn't have to be a kind of in-depth relational database such as SQL. But if you have, Excel or Access or even SQL set up, some way to store information you have, it can be very useful. Particularly in academic sense, perhaps, if you want a bit more of a quantitative analysis, which would bring us very nicely into graph and network software. And by graph and network, I mean sort of group network analysis. Think of the classic investigator's red string on a corkboard, except digitally. Now, a lot of these that listed, these are just some examples. The I2 Analyst Notebook is very good, but it's also about, last time I checked, I think about 9,000 a year, maybe 3,000 a year, something like that. And the other two are free. And these are tools which you can import via database, or you can add information more visually. I should have added a screenshot. Apologies for that, but you can look them up there. And in terms of Maltego as well, you can actually use the tool actively in OSINT investigations, as there are many, I can't remember what they're called, but you can do searches within it. For instance, you can have a name, you can have a website, you can have a company linked together, and you can run searches directly based on those. So you can click on the website and go, I want to search IP addresses, or if there are any emails associated with it, etc. You click on the person, you might go, I want to do a search for social media accounts, that kind of thing. And so I would definitely recommend using network analysis in investigations. You don't need to do it in all of them, but there are a lot of advantages by just adding things to your network as you go along without even thinking about it. So adding individual nodes of information you find and any connections you find. And by the end of it, you'll find you have a large network that you didn't realize was connected. And then that's really the beauty of it. Seeing the relationships and finding missing relationships that often fall through the cracks. This is how I did a big research project on the Abu Sayyaf group in the Philippines, just through mainly about 80% through local news articles, which in the Philippines are very extensive in terms of the information they give. They'll tell you the names of people arrested, their nicknames, their family members, where they were arrested, the weapons they were found with, and any history that they've had. And from this, I could create a big graph of in-depth family relations across different islands and basically map out the group structure and relationships themselves, all through just media analysis of a few hundred articles, manually adding names and places and the relationships. And also maps. So there are other options than Google, but Google Earth is just very useful. Google Earth Pro, you can download on your desktop. You can see historic satellite imagery. You can have multiple layers. You can import, export KML files and embed a lot of data within it. So it's very useful for a free mapping tool, especially if you're not doing hardcore GIS type stuff. It can be very useful. And the visualizations of these are also bonus as well when presenting the data. To have a network graph, it can be more visually impactful to the audience. The same with a map if you have a location-based project as well. So these are some tools to keep in mind. It's not an extensive list of every single thing, of course, because every investigation is different and the requirements will be different. And even within these aren't an extensive list. I did mention Tor earlier in a previous section, but Tor is the onion relay, which is essentially a browser that lets you access the dark web or the onion network, which is also free to download. You can also look at other websites through that, but it's a very slow browser due to the nature of it, and there's no search engines. So I wouldn't recommend getting Tor unless you have some very specific need to access the dark web, and most of the time there isn't really a need to do that. So, but it is free to get as well. So also you want to stay protected while you're doing the research. And there are many ways to do this. Again, it depends on what you're looking at, what the subject is, what you intend to do. An easy one would be to get a VPN, a virtual private network, which also has the advantage of allowing you to kind of spoof websites to where you are located. So it hides what network you're on and spoofs. This can be very useful, for instance, if you want to do research into somewhere like Russia, which has a lot of its internet is now restricted since the 2022 conflict starting. But if you use a VPN to, for instance, spoof yourself into Kazakhstan or somewhere like Serbia or Bulgaria, those countries are a bit more friendly with Russia, and so the internet hasn't been restricted there. So you can then access various websites in Russia while it thinks you're in, say, Kazakhstan. So it can be quite useful to get around the restrictions in that way. Using a virtual machine, I know I put it at the bottom list, but I'll bump it up, which is essentially a digital version of a computer that runs in your computer. And so there's a few advantages to having a virtual machine. One, you can use it as a burner machine. So it's like think of it as a burner computer that's stored on your computer. You can set it up and you can wipe it. So you can do all your investigations within the virtual machine. And then after the investigation, you can just destroy that. So anything linking that machine is gone. And so it adds another layer of protection between you and sort of the wider world. And it also contains generally anything within it. So for instance, if you run a virus or something within that virtual machine, mostly it should be contained within that. And as I said, it's very usually once you have it set up, you can have it set up so the virtual machine runs with all the software that you need just installed as a part of it. Common ones, for instance, like running Kali Linux, or just even Windows with Windows. It's just an easy extra layer of protection. In terms of more active measures, using basically fake accounts, particularly when on social media or signing up to forums or something like that, is very easy method to protect yourself. So don't use your own, say, Facebook if you're looking at extreme Facebook groups. Don't use your own phone number. You can get, there are many websites. If you just search on a browser, temporary phone number or temporary email, that will come up where you can create temporary numbers and emails, which, for instance, Quacker.io, you can use that. It'll give you a phone number from different countries. You can use that to sign up to something. It will then, if there's say a text message comes that you need, it will come to that website and it will just list it publicly, and you can just use that to sign up as an account. And then you don't need to use that number again. There are other websites that do similar things. In terms of burner emails, Proton Mail is a very good free encrypted mail service. I know it's also used by British intelligence services sometimes. Mail.com is just another free mail website where you can have a lot of different mail addresses, and tempmail.org is similar to Cracker, as in it gives you a temporary email rather than you're just making another email. It's one that is maybe for one use things like a passcode to get in to a website or something. And so you can use these to create fake accounts or to sign up for things without using your actual numbers. Or if you have a physical burner phone or spare SIM or something, then that works very well as well. And these are important because, again, you don't want, whatever you're looking into, particularly extremism, you want that level of separation. And of course, here, when you're making fake accounts and things like that, do keep in mind that many websites, this will be against the terms of service. And, ethically, there is a level of deception there. So you've got to keep those in mind of what you're doing, of, is this relevant? Again, do I need to be doing this? Is this the most appropriate way to get the information that I want when you're doing it? But it's that sort of level of security that will help. So once you're doing these as well, just remember to be smart. Most issues on the internet these days, in terms of viruses or getting detected, even people who in the dark web who get found out, the vast majority of them get caught because of human error, not because of anything technical. It doesn't matter, VPN or whatever. It's because people use the same usernames and the same passwords. They leak data about themselves they don't realize, and they get caught just because they make a mistake. So there are other websites, but I've listed one here, haveibeenpwned.com, which basically you put in your email or your phone number, and it will tell you how many leaks those have been involved in. So you can really see, which is also a good OSINT tool as well, to check if, say, an email or something you have has been used in the past. But it can be quite eye-opening of how much the data may have been leaked as well. So just be really careful generally. Okay, so on to searching itself. Finally, we look into search engines. And again, quite a basic thing, but there's a little bit more depth to it. And I've listed 4 search engines here: Google, Yandex, DuckDuckGo, and Bing. And the reason I've listed these 4 in particular, because there are many, many search engines, is each of these has their own index. And so the index is what a search engine uses basically to, it crawls through the internet finding links. And then those links are kind of put in a big database, which is then made in a searchable fashion. And that database is the index for the search engine. And each of those search engines have their own index. So the database that Google has will be different to what Bing has. And in real terms, this means when you're searching these, different information will come up on your searches. And I don't just mean the order of information, which is true. So Google will prioritize sort of advertising compared to something like DuckDuckGo, but the actual information there. For instance, on Google, if you search a Gmail address, full Gmail, likely you'll get little to no results because I think they scrape Gmails. But if you do the same on Yandex, Yandex doesn't care about that. So if there's any reference to your Gmail address somewhere, it might come up. So Yandex is a Russian, essentially a Russian Google, for those who don't know, but it's incredibly useful. It has a very large index and less of a care for privacy, which for OSINT makes it quite useful. But if there's any serious searching you're doing, you should definitely not be limiting yourself to just one search engine, because you'll 100% get different results if you use all of them. And many times we've found things that have not been on Google or Bing, for instance, that will come up on other search engines. And there's also clustering search engines. So Carrot2 is the best example, but there are a few others. And again, I should have put a screenshot up for this, so apologies, but there is a link here. Hopefully you'll be able to get a copy of this presentation afterwards as well, with all these links. But I'm not sure about that at the moment. Sorry. But anyway, Carrot2, so a clustering search engine. So you search something, say you go to search Boris Johnson, for instance, and instead of just listing articles or things like other search engines would, it categorizes similar news stories or themes about what you've searched. So in this case, Boris Johnson might return Prime Minister of the UK, it might return Mayor of London, it might return scandals. And then you can look within those categories and it will further refine into subcategories of related content. And from those, you can look at the direct links as well, much like a search engine. So the reason you might want to do this is if you have little knowledge about something, so a person or a group, for instance, or a company, you can use Carrot2 as a clustering search engine to get a very quick high-level overview of what they have been involved in, what they're related to, what their media presence is, very quickly, rather than going on another search engine and just having, like a Wikipedia page that, or, various news articles or company-related information that might not give you a wider snapshot of what this thing is about. So I often use it at the start of investigation, particularly, like I said, when there's something that I'm not familiar with. It can be very useful. I would have a go, try it out, and you'll see what I mean. I'm not sure I'd explain it particularly well, but it can be very useful getting quite high-level information. And so now we have our search engines. What do we actually search on them? Well, you can just put in the word of whatever you want, but that might not be specific enough, particularly something like Google or Bing, where it can be quite smart, especially now they use a sort of AI integration, but some things are just too generic that it won't help just to have a word or a phrase. And with that, you can use something called Boolean searches. Just checking the time, sorry. So, or search operators. And if you look these up, if you on a search engine, you look up Boolean search or search operators, you'll come up with a big list. So say Google Boolean search. There are pages that will tell you these search operators, but these are things like, so if you wanted to look for fires in London and you search fires in London, that might come up with things like local fires or often the Great Fire of London. But if you don't care about the Great Fire of London, then you could do something like minus to get rid of something. And then you can use quotations to have an exact phrase. So you could do minus quotation, Great Fire of London, quotation, and then suddenly all the results will have any results with the Great Fire of London will be excluded. There are a lot of other more complicated ones. You could do, for instance, site searches, where you go site, colon, and then the name of a website, and that will return only results from that website. So it could be like bbc.co.uk if you only want results from the BBC. And you can also stack these. So you could do minus site, colon, bbc.co.uk. So suddenly have no results from BBC. I use this frequently for sites like Pinterest, which if you do certain searches will just dominate results. And if you know that's not what you're looking for, then you can kind of confidently get rid of websites like this. You can also filter on these search engines, things like date. So you can do time restricted filters. So say you know that an event happened within a 2-month period, you can set the start date of the search, the end date of the search, and it will just return results that were indexed. Although I'm not sure if they were indexed within that time or if they were existed within that time. And I think that depends on which search engine you use. For instance, if an article was posted, 2009, but it was indexed in 2012, I'm not sure how that would be returned, but I suspect that it would be based on when it was posted rather than indexed time, unless there's no reference to the site having the date, which some sites are undated. So there are many filters on these search engines that might be under the search bar. It's usually something that says tools or settings or filters, which is a kind of hide away, throw away bit. Click on that and there'll be additional options. I'd like to go through them more, but just in terms of time limitations, I don't have time to show you, unfortunately. But it will really, and this is any aspect of your life when you want to search something, using search operators, Boolean searching and filters will definitely elevate any research that you do. And it's very easy to get the hang of. So that's searching things that we have now or been, but sometimes things get lost or removed. As commonly said, everything that you put on the internet is there forever. And I know from experience that is not true. And sometimes it's quite irritating, particularly when things come up in search engine results and you click on the page and then it goes 404, page not found, or something similar because it no longer exists. However, sometimes we can go back and get something that used to exist. So there are a few Internet Archive sites. So there's the Internet Archive, specifically the Wayback Machine, and archive.today too. And I would recommend, if you have a web page that is that you knew had some information but no longer exists, take the URL and go and whack it into both of those websites and see if it was archived. Here's an example I used, which is a capture from the Wayback Machine of the website i3l.co.za. Now, this is an IS media website that was shut down, I think, early this year. But it was captured in 23 and 22 multiple times. And here you can see the About Us page. And the About Us page, I don't know why they laid it out like this. You have all these different languages, and within each of these different languages, there's drop downs to the different IS media of those countries or those languages and regional areas. So we can still view in the past this website and this IS media. These would just be multiple posts of various things. And it'll be hosted within the Wayback Machine. So you're not actually going on the website. So it actually also adds that layer of protection from you, because this is just a kind of a copy that isn't the actual website. And we haven't lost it as well. So for a lot of research, particularly historic research, this can be really useful. And you can also archive pages yourself. So if you know there's a website you want to keep in the future, you can take the URL, put it into Wayback Machine or archive.today. And if there's no archive of it, you can, when you put it in, you can say, I want to save this page. It's a process that takes 1 or 2 minutes. You just click I want to save this page, and it will do it automatically. You don't need to sign up. It's free to do. Very easy as well. But there are also cached pages which you can use on search engines. So Google used to have this too, but they got rid of it this year, which is very annoying. But Bing and Yandex both have it still. So when you listing search results on a search engine, usually at the end of the URL, the search result, there may be like a little arrow, or maybe a kind of a burger menu, the three dots. And if you go on that, there will be something that says cached page or saved page. And if you go on that, it'll open a similar previous version of that website that is hosted through the search engine, much like the Wayback Machine. So this is another good way to see websites that may not exist anymore, that might not be on the Wayback Machine or archive today, but they might still exist within the cache of the search engine itself. So these are pretty useful tools to find websites, and I've used them extensively, and it can be incredibly useful, particularly for, say, company searching, when there's, a company existed, 5 years ago, and it had pictures of all the directors or something like that, and doesn't anymore. You can go and view the old website, which no longer exists. So quite useful. Or in the case of extremism, like, for instance, this IS website here. So there's also reverse image searching, which we can do through browsers or other websites. Now, this has improved dramatically over the last probably 3 years. But I would still recommend using multiple search engines and tools for any image. So this is an image my friend took when they were on holiday in Spain. Put it into, this is Google. And just from this snapshot, it tells me, exactly where it is. It's a pretty heavy tourist hotspot, so there's going to be a lot of photos of the same place. And immediately it gets a variety of them, and I can see. The limitation of Google in terms of image searching is particularly people. Google, because of the privacy settings, it doesn't like to show you people. Unlike other tools, so Yandex, it doesn't really care as much. It will return other people, and PimEyes is a dedicated facial recognition search as well, which you do have to pay for. You can search for free, but to get the and it will show you the results, but to get the links to the results, as in the actual website it took it from, you have to pay. You can do it monthly or a one-off fee of, I think, about £14, maybe £15 per search. But monthly it might be about 30 or so pounds. I don't recall, but like I said, you can do it for free. So I'd recommend checking PimEyes out. Take a few photos of yourself, or have a few photos, put it in, and see what comes up. You might be quite surprised at what it finds. It's very good. And TinEye as well, which is sort of one of the original reverse image searches. DupliChecker basically is a website where you can search all of these websites in one. It's a plagiarism detecting website, but it works for images as well. So if you go on the link that I have there, or just search DupliChecker reverse image searching, you can save time by putting images in that, and it just searches all the others. But going back to the people, to when I'm referring to having issues with people, I suppose the big difference between Google and Yandex would be, say I took a photo, or somebody took a photo of me, and I reverse image search this. Google might return images of, a white man in a blue shirt with a beard, and have lots of sort of men with beards like that. Yandex might return lots of pictures of me. And so hopefully that gives you an idea of the difference in terms of privacy. But both are very good for locations and things like brands and logos, often quite obscure. Yandex is a better index for Eastern Europe, Russia, Central Asia, and parts of East Asia, but it's much weaker on Parts of Africa, America, and South America particularly is quite weak, while Google has a lot larger index of images generally. There are other more specific use cases for reverse image searching. I use it a lot for geolocation, and also sort of investigations of working out, say, the asset tracing or something of the price of a watch or the make of a car, something like that. Can be quite useful. But it can be used also for social media, for instance. There's a website, which I haven't linked, which allows you to search VK, which is a sort of Russian social media website, very popular, big one, that you can find accounts on VK by reverse facial searching on that, and it gives you the account ID, which then you can use to find other information. Just checking time again. Okay, social media searching. I'll blow through this along a little bit quicker, but I've kind of split up social media into about 3 different types. So open, mixed, and closed, which is the next slide, of how accessible it is. So open social media, I've put Reddit and the Chans. So this would be like 4chan, old websites like 8chan, 2chan, which don't exist anymore, and other duplicates of them, which are kind of notorious for having a lot of extreme content on them. And these are particularly far-right content, white supremacist. And Reddit as well has a lot of extreme content. It might be more subtle. They've really cracked down over the last 2 or so years. But there's still definitely a lot of opportunities for research there. So this lower image here that's taken from Reddit, that's a Reddit called Clown World, which is a kind of continuation of others like Friend World and things, which is basically sort of subtle. I say subtle, more subtle than a lot of it. White supremacist propaganda channels, which are free to access and comment on or whatever. You don't need an account or anything like that for Reddit. If you want to look at Reddit and there are pages that are restricted, say like they say not safe for work or whatever, that doesn't necessarily mean things like pornography, but it could include that. It could be like violent images, things like that. And it says you need to make an account. You can bypass that on the URL, or it says www.reddit.com. If you change the www to old, so OLD, then it will go to the old version of the website, and it doesn't have the same restrictions that require an account. So you can access some restricted information on Reddit without making an account like that. And that's why I say it's open, the chance to. So the mixed ones are ones that you can view certain content without an account, but others you need it. So these are usually the big social media ones, because they still want people to be able to find them and entice people to join, but they want users to have more privacy. And these are really cracked down on privacy since I've started working as well. But Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, like I said, VK, VKontakte, the Russian one, TikTok, and Threads. None of them require an account to view information, but a lot of the information will be restricted unless you have an account. And at the top there is an example of an open public Facebook group of Boer nationalists, which are kind of linked to white supremacists as well. So, a lot of these groups aren't trying to hide, and if you just have a fake account, you can get a full access to all of these things. But there are other closed social media, so you need an account to view the content, and there's no way to really get around that. And here are some, and these are usually ones that are linked to a phone number. So say Telegram, for instance, Snapchat and WhatsApp explicitly. WhatsApp has groups now, which is why I've counted it as social media rather than just sort of messaging. A Snapchat can be really useful. There's a Snap Map, if you're not familiar, which is sort of a worldwide heat map of people posting pictures publicly. So that Snapchat is an application where you can send pictures to people and they get deleted after you send them, after you view them maybe twice. But I use Snapchat quite a lot because it's very popular in Saudi Arabia and Pakistan and Afghanistan. So it's very useful to get on the ground visual information because people post public snaps of them driving around or something. And so you can get a very good look at the kind of the streets or the sort of ambience there of whether people are, going to the markets, how the road conditions are, that sort of thing. So it's quite useful, but you do need a phone number. Telegram is a huge source of knowledge, and it's packed full of extremist groups. It's very popular. I follow probably a few hundred, particularly far right in the UK and US, and a lot of in Ukraine and Russia. And they're free to join. You just need a phone number, free to join. There's two types of groups in Telegram we'll mention. There's membership groups, which you join as a member and you can interact with other users and your name will be showed. And then there's subscription groups, which you subscribe to a channel and you just view information and you're an anonymous viewer. So I only tend to join subscription groups because I don't want a presence in a membership group. So here is an example one, Patriot Front at the bottom. That's just an image from a US far-right group that's expanding quite a lot on their Telegram channel. Again, public accessible, just search it, join. There's no requirements. And a lot of these are very, very open groups as well that you find. There's some more specific ones. So, Discord, it might be a bit trickier to find extremist groups, but they're there. Gab and Parler, notorious kind of, I suppose, Twitter clones for the far right in the US, and they haven't really taken off that much. And then the kind of outliers here, maybe a Rocket Chat, which is a open source internet relay channel, so communication channel. But there's one called Tech Haven, which is basically an IS forum. So they post all their media there. A lot of members can join there and get information about how to conduct attacks and things like that. And you can join that freely. You just need an account. I think you have to join via Telegram. There's a Telegram account where you just say, basically, I want to join, and it gives you a code, and then you get an account. And then there's Chirpwire, which is from that screenshot at the top. It's a Twitter clone, and you can make an account for free. You need an account. But it's just full of Islamist groups, mainly Al-Qaeda affiliated. So the example I have up there is there's a post probably from about 6 days ago from Al-Zalaka, which is the JNIM in Mali, the JNIM media organization, and they post pretty frequently about their attacks they do in Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger. They're also in Telegram, but they keep getting banned. Yeah, also I should mention on Telegram, you can follow groups like Hamas, Hezbollah, as well as a lot of others, and certain JNIM and Al-Qaeda and IS affiliated media organizations as well. They're pretty open. Finding them can be a bit tricky. The searching on a lot of these groups are very difficult, just because they have a very poor user interface, essentially, not because they're trying to make it hard, but you can find them. And lastly, now I'm probably going to running a little bit behind, but lastly, data integrity. Once we have the information, or we found information, how do we know it's useful? Is there anything we can do? So firstly, with open source, we want to try and validate it and verify it. So we'll do this largely by cross-referencing. Is this source mentioned somewhere else? Is this the only source which references this? If it's a random post on Twitter by an account that is just being created, that says some extreme stuff that can't be verified, then the trustworthiness is pretty probably pretty low. If it's a news organization or multiple, say, journalists have said the same thing and they have different sources or mix of sources, then it's probably more likely to be true or have some sort of credibility to it. So you've got to keep in mind, just because you find something doesn't mean it's true. Just because you find something without sourcing doesn't mean it's not true as well. And it can help if you try and categorize your information as you find it, in terms of what's the source? Are there other sources? How reliable is that source? Because if you find, a Telegram account, for instance, that has some deep insider information and is usually pretty accurate, even though nobody else is saying it, then that could be quite reliable, even if you can't cross-reference that. So I find categorizing things can help, and you do that as you go along the research, either in your mind, although probably have some sort of rating system for sort of reliability, and maybe accuracy as well. And also keep a trail of your sources. So I say basically every link that has some nugget of information, keep it safe, because the links can die, as we know. You're on a website today, tomorrow it can be taken down, nobody's archived it, then you're a bit stuffed. So you might want to take screenshots or just take the link, have some way to keep a trail. A lot of my clients need that. They use it for litigation support or something, so they want a clear trail. But it's a very good habit to do anyway. And you want to keep your information and your sources secure as well. So this goes back a bit to GDPR and data, but also for your own sake, you want to have a level of security, so to protect yourself and the project as well. Keep a backup, maybe encrypt things, at least have a lot of restricted access to the information as well, so it's not just on a public computer. You don't just put it on your sort of Gmail or something like that where somebody can access it. But with that, I think we're ready for questions. I stormed through that, and the timing wasn't too off, only 9 minutes behind.
No, you were perfect. Thank you very much, Tristan, for the amazing talk. Really, really interesting. And yes, you mentioned it's time for the Q&A. So if you do have any questions, please pop them in the Q&A section on Zoom. We've got the first one. But recent or soon to be graduate, what are the best avenues after university to get into OSINT?
So I would say an obvious one, that trying to get a job in the sector. There are a lot of investigation roles, not just investigation roles, but a lot of international security and intelligence related roles, particularly in the private sector, and the public sector. There's currently a foundation analyst course from MI5 being advertised at the moment, so you might want to look into that. And you don't need a big intelligence background for that, or any intelligence background at all. They'll train you in everything you need. There's a lot of internships in the UK intelligence sector as well. And there are some dedicated recruitment firms as well that can help with that. There's a website, securitysearcher.com, which lists a lot of jobs and also recruiters and things like that. But if you're searching LinkedIn jobs or Indeed, and you search OSINT or investigator or sort of country analyst, country threat analyst, I can talk a lot of it. I've given a few talks on how to get a job, but that should hopefully help. There's also, feel free to contact me on LinkedIn, anyone, for whatever reason, but I've helped quite a few people get into the industry, so I'm willing to help out if that's the case.
Thank you very much, Tristan. Well, we're waiting for further questions to come in. I'm gonna ask one. You mentioned that it's very tricky to find the extremist content across the social media or across dark web or surface web. Would you give any tips how to maximize success, if you will, in searching for this content?
Well, like a lot of things, particularly for, say, let's take the example of Islamist extremist groups, right? Um, there is, because there's been a lot of research done over the last 20 years, particularly into groups like that. Kind of, I stand on the shoulders of the giants before me, and there's been a lot of articles, particularly academic pieces, about extremism in media. And so I read a lot of these older articles, which reference the groups and affiliated media organizations, which then I can search in variations of transliterations or directly in Arabic or something like that. And often you get lucky and you find through a sort of trail of path of one that still exists, because a lot of them have been shut down, or you find the correct transliteration, or this correct sort of use similar terminology. For instance, you might look at old posts and say, like, how are they writing things, the writing style, and search based on that. But it can be quite difficult. In terms of the English language things, it's a little bit easier. So for the South African one, that could just be targeted searches of, Boer, nationalism, Volk, all these kind of keywords, and suddenly you'll find 100 groups. Similar in UK and American ones, just variations of patriot and the country names and things, and you kind of get quite a list. But the advantage of a lot of the right-wing ones particularly is once you find one or two, they're often quite entrenched with others, as opposed to the Islamist ones are a bit more segregated. So it can lead to a bit of a kind of a snowball effect of finding them, and then you find the regional chapters. So for instance, the Proud Boys, they have Proud Boys Britannia, Proud Boys Wales, Proud Boys Scotland, and then within those groups they might share other ones, and you just trawl through and see what, or look at the users and see what they're a part of as well. But it is tricky, and I wish I could give a harder one. A lot of the time is spent searching for the content rather than within the content.
Yeah. Thank you. We've got another question from anonymous attendee. Do you use AI tools in your investigations?
I don't actually. I have used software, like paid for software. Some of the clients that I've used and some of the jobs I've used have it, which is very useful. Things like a data miner or a Daga, a lot of OSINT software, but it's quite expensive, so I don't generally use it myself. And a lot of the clients that kind of contract us, I guess they want us to do, again, something that's more traceable, which a lot of AI tools, can be a bit more difficult for that, especially kind of the free open source ones. And we try to keep a more purist open source, as in something that somebody else can replicate, which again helps with that trail of information of, if we can do it and then we give it to a client and they can't replicate that themselves because they don't have the £4,000 a year tool, then it's not as helpful to them. So I say I have used them, but generally we don't try to use them.
Thank you. Another question from Maura Conway. Hi, Tristan. I have some concerns about the increasing use of the term concept OSINT in academic settings. What do you feel are the major differences between what you do and traditional academic research?
Well, I suppose that's a good question, because I do have issues with the term OSINT generally as well. Not in terms of academia necessarily, it might kind of cross over. But for instance, some of you might be familiar, like since the Ukraine war started on Twitter, there's a lot of accounts that post information about the conflict, geolocating missile sites and other conflict things that will refer to themselves as OSINT, accounts, and not just on Twitter, a lot of websites. And the reason I would say that they're not OSINT is because they lack the key point of the intelligence part of it. And I think this is really the issue, is that people do open source information gathering, but not intelligence, because there isn't something that they're trying to action with that information. People find information and they put it out to the world, but they don't have a clear intelligence goal in mind. People aren't making decisions based on that guy on Twitter who's just geolocated the strike, right? Nobody else may have done that, but it's not necessarily intelligence. And I think that is probably the key with academia and also investigative journalism as well, of what is your question, who is the audience, and what is the intent to be done with this. If it's research for the sake of research, then it could be dubious of whether it is the intelligence part of open source. But in terms of the actual research methodologies and techniques themselves, they could be identical. But I think it's a case of separating the open source from the intelligence, and just being happy at least with with the open source, even if it's not the intelligent aspect. I hope that helps a little bit.
Yeah, thank you very much. Are there any further questions to Tristan? Okay, I'm gonna jump in. Abuse my. Oh, we've got actually one. Can we use OSINT to identify recidivism behaviors?
I mean, I guess I'd need a little bit more context on that. But in terms of a behavioral analysis, that is certainly something that you can use OSINT for. You can do it sort of on a wide scale. There's a lot of tools that let you do sort of language and intent analysis. So, you scrape Twitter for 10,000 accounts to look at the language and go, how hostile is it, that kind of thing. Or you can do more targeted individual searching of, is this individual, are there kind of warning flags, red flags, about their behaviors or intent or something. I've done a lot of kind of hostile actor research, to stalkers and people who harass people and stuff like that. And, you can often see patterns in these people, sometimes not very subtle at all, about the messaging that they do. They're quite hostile. But at the same time, if somebody is trying to hide something, then all they have to do is not post, and they've hidden it from, the wider world. So possibly a little bit of a vague answer because I lack a bit of context. But I'd say maybe.
Thank you very much. Okay, another question for you. Has your professional OSINT experience affected your personal use and relationship with the internet and social media?
Yeah, I would say so. As much as I'd love to say that I'm locked down, super host, private, ninja online, that's not true. And I think many in the OSINT community, that's kind of also not true. That the nature of it being open source is that generally I found people are incredibly happy to share their experiences, so in a more professional way. And that's how you learn. With OSINT, I don't think you really need to go on like a paid training course, because the amount of information out there of how to do it and learning how to do it is so vast. A lot of what I've done, I have been taught formally, but a lot of the techniques that I've learned are completely self-taught. I say self-taught. It's not, that would be undermining the value of the people that have given up their time to put things out themselves. I have I've taken what people have put out and I've put out things as well. So I would say yes, it has changed my relationship with social media a bit. Certain things I'm a bit more locked down on. But professionally, I'm still quite open. Although I do spend a lot of time consensually, helping my friends, for instance, lock down their accounts and finding what they might have online if they because a lot of people think they don't leak things when they do. And so I guess it's quite eye-opening in that respect. And on a less privacy-focused matter, I would say doing OSINT has vastly improved my day-to-day research abilities on anything as well.
Thank you, Tristan. I think we have time for one or two more questions, if anyone wants to put them in the Q&A session now. Okay, while people might type the final questions, I might jump in and kind of follow up on the discussion you had with Maura regarding the use of the term OSINT and where it is actually applicable when it comes to academic research. And I was just curious, when it comes to research in extremist or terrorist organizations, could you give examples? I'm conscious that you might not be able to give your personal examples from your work because of the corporate secret, but where the use of OSINT was or is particularly applicable when you do research on these organizations, where you find what kinds of projects people might ask to do when it comes to terrorist or extremist organizations based on OSINT.
Right. So a lot of private organizations, particularly big companies in certain industries like media, banking, insurance, that sort of thing, they have a lot of groups targeting them. Um, so so a lot of the right wing, for instance, were heavily involved in the UK. Were involved with a lot of the sort of anti-lockdown movement, which ties into a lot of anti-media sentiment because mainstream media are sort of this kind of boogeyman that are responsible for spreading misinformation in their mind. And so a lot of media organizations, for instance, being targeted by right-wing groups in terms of protest, turning up to the offices in protest, or individuals and filming, trying to get some sort of, kind of raise out of the security or whatever to show them. And so you have individuals or a part of organizations, security teams that will be monitoring these groups in sort of a more defensive way to see if there's any protests or anything like this organized. Sporting organizations or big events will be monitoring terrorist and also extremist groups ahead of events and during events. So like a big football game, if there's a bomb threat. As an example, a few months ago, IS in Madrid posted, so IS KP, which is Khorasan province in Pakistan, they posted a series of infographics targeting football game in Madrid, including information about tactics to be used, tools to be used. So saying drone, like use a drone, use machetes, attack at these places where the people are offloading from buses at this time during the game. So very specific tactical information, which then, of course, the security services react to, and in terms of publicly, but also all the private organizations around the football game. So the football game itself, all the media there, any sponsors, any charity, events, any group organizations, they then can react with their security and emergency planning based on things. So a lot of it is a lot more kind of mundane corporate emergency planning, disaster mitigation stuff. It just so happens that it's a terrorist group or an extremist group that are doing it. Others, so for maritime security, it would be things like this area has a high instances of attack or kidnap attacks. We need to understand how the group operates, their motivations, the successfulness of the attacks, why they're doing it, so we can mitigate for our clients. So in terms of maritime insurance or maritime security, which will affect the prices of things, or saying to their clients like, well, if you just add barbed wire to the hulls, then we've said 73% of attacks will stop because they use ladders and the barbed wire will bounce the ladder off. It could be kind of simple things like that. So there are quite a lot of use cases in the private sector. I can't really talk about the public sector so much, but I think that's probably a little bit more obvious. But it does come up, maybe not every day, maybe not day to day, but a bit more frequently than you might think.
Yeah, thank you very much. Well, I think that's probably going to be our last question. Thank you so much, Tristan, for coming in and giving the presentation. It was really, really interesting. Thank you very much to everyone who signed up. There will be a recording on VOX-Pol YouTube channel available to watch or rewatch the presentation later. I think we'll be able to send the slides as well. As Tristan mentioned, you could find him on LinkedIn.